Well, good morning, folks. My name is Andrew Setters. I'm a reporter here with WLWT Channel 5 in Cincinnati, and I've gotten involved with the Comic Expo over the last couple of years. I really love getting a chance to talk to folks about their experiences and their background. And I know you know who this is, but this is Ricou Browing, the last of the Universal monsters, and the underwater actor for the creature from the Black Lagoon, and he's had a very long storied career after that point. Let's get into, I guess, where you were, what you were doing before the creature, because the creature kind of took you in a completely different direction.
Yeah, I was attending Florida State College, FSU, now, best football team around. Anyway, I was attending college, and a friend of mine was the general manager of a hotel called Wakulla Springs.
Okay.
And he was going out of town, and I used to work down there as a lifeguard, whatever. And he said, I have some people coming from California to make a film, and they want to look at Wakulla Springs as a location. He said, I can't be here. Would you mind picking them up and bringing them to the springs and showing them the springs?
Okay.
I said, okay. So I picked them up and took them to the springs, and they loved the river. It's a beautiful wildlife refuge. And the cameraman wanted to shoot some film underwater. It's crystal clear, and the bowl of the spring is 4 acres large. And he said, would you mind swimming in front of the camera so that I can get some perspective to the size of a human to fish and logs and grass and whatever? And I said, okay. So I did. They loved the springs, and I took them back to the airport. They left. And about a week later, I got a call from the manager again, and he said, they're looking for you. And I said, who? He said, the people that are making your film. He said, I gave him your home phone number. And I said, okay. So I got a call from a gentleman named Jack Arnold. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he turns out to be the director. He says, we're making a movie about an underwater monster. He said, how would you like to be the monster? I said, why not? And what it was, he said, we like the way you swim. And the way I swim normally is the way the creature swam in the film.
Okay.
So it's not something I had to learn. I just did it because it's the way I did it. And that's how it started.
Did you have, were you a swimmer? Did you have a lot of experience with that? Because it's pretty taxing, pretty demanding to do those underwater stunts.
Yeah, I had a background of swimming a lot and diving. And I was on an Air Force swim team when I was in the Air Force. And I just was a good swimmer, that was all. No Olympics, no anything else.
Did you have, well, like I said, I know this is taking you in a completely different direction. What did you anticipate doing with your life at that point as a young man before Hollywood came
I was going to college, as I was telling you, and I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
And I found out I was too dumb. I couldn't pass chemistry or whatever, so I went into physical education. And that's where I was heading. And after I finished The Creature from the Black Lagoon, I got several other jobs underwater in the film business, and so I just stayed in it. And when you do one movie, it's over, you're out of a job. So I had to start creating my own jobs. So I created a show called Flipper about a boy and a dolphin. And we did 2 features and 4 years of television.
Wow.
And I created another movie called Salty about a boy and a sea lion. And we did a show called Gentle Ben, Boy and a Bear.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah, and I worked as a second unit director on films like Thunderball, Never Say Never Again, James Bond films. And we did shows like Around the World, Under the Sea, and various others for other companies. And I've been in the film business ever since. And, I haven't retired. They retired me.
Tell me, did they shoot the entirety of the creature there in one spot, or did they do the stunts and the underwater sequences in a different place?
No, it was kind of difficult, but the first unit shot in L.A. on the back lot at Universal Studios.
So the first unit is the main actors,
Correct.
the main stars, all the above ground
Correct.
above water
Correct.
sequences.
And the underwater scenes were all shot at Wakulla Springs. And the only way you could tie the two together was there was a scene in the film where Julia Adams is on the deck of the ship and she's smoking a cigarette and she flips it and it hits the water. And underwater you see it land and you pan down and you see the creature in the crystal clear water. So that's how they tied the back lot to the spring. Julie doesn't even smoke. So.
But you didn't get a chance to meet and interact with all the main actors at all then?
Yes, I did, because I was there having my suit made.
Okay.
Well, I'd say the first week of shooting, topside, on the back lot. And I met, Julie thought she was going to do some of the swimming. So she and the cameraman and myself went to Catalina Island, and we taught her how to dive with scuba gear and so forth. But she never got to use it in the film, because she had a double ginger standard. Okay,
so you get the suit made. I've got to imagine that that's a process of trying to get fitted for this full body suit, and have somebody tell you get in the water and swim in it.
Yeah, well, the suit took quite a while to build. The first suit took about a month, and they finished it, and we went on the back lot at Universal. They have a big tank, and we went down in the tank and shot some test film of the suit, and also some test film of Julie in her bathing suit. And the first suit, no one liked at all.
What was the difference between that and the
Well, the
regular?
first suit, you looked like it was awful. I have a picture of it downstairs.
Okay.
But it was awful looking. And so then they started building a second suit, and that took about another month. And they dressed you in a leotard, and then they were going to glue the pieces on to the leotard, the rubber pieces. And the pieces were made of latex and sponge rubber.
Okay.
And I had the leotard on, and Jack Gil-Man, the makeup guy, put a big piece up on my chest and glued it on. And he went to get some other pieces. And I said, Jack, this is getting warm. But he says, oh, that's all right. And then he was bringing another piece over. I said, it's not getting warm, it's hot. And then I said, Jack, you either got to take me out of this thing or I'm going to tear it off because it's burning me. So anyway, they took it off, and I had a huge blister right on my chest. I still have a scar from it.
So just like a chemical burn?
The chemical burn. So anyway, they quit doing that.
Yeah, that's good.
And they built a mold of your body, and then they put the leotard on the mold, and they glued the pieces on that. So the second suit was finished, and we began filming.
How long of a filming process was that? I've got to think that that's pretty demanding to be spending probably long hours in the water to try to get it all done.
Well, we filmed underwater at Wakulla, I'd say for about a month. And we'd work each day probably 4 hours in and out of the water. And the suit was sponge rubber and latex. It was light when it was dry, but when you got wet, it was heavy.
Oh yeah, I bet.
And as you know, rubber floats, so I couldn't sink, so I had to wear lead. I had a lead chest plate, lead thigh pads, lead around my ankles, so that I'd be able to go underwater.
You had to wrestle that thing every day for a month.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I put it this way, it's like when you first play football, you put on the uniform, and it's clumsy, you got shoulder pads and all this stuff. But when you get in the game, you don't even know you have it on. And the suit was kind of the same way. Once I got swimming, I wasn't aware of the suit being there, although it was, clumsy and awkward.
Did you have any concept at the time of what you were embarking on? I mean, this is something, you played the creature in the two sequels also. I mean, was this just, hey, oh yeah, absolutely, Hollywood comes calling, I'll play in a movie, or did you have a concept at that moment that this could really take off and change your life?
No, I had no idea. And mainly I was working for money. I had children, and I wasn't making much money, and this helped me a lot. So I enjoyed that part of it. So I said, hey, this is a business I want to be in. So I stayed in it, and I did pretty well.
I watched the movie recently, and I'm amazed at how well it stands up. I know a lot of folks got a chance to see it in 3D last night.
Yeah.
And just a beautiful film. The underwater sequences are really breathtaking. That's got technologically at that time, that had to be a challenge.
Well, not really. It was just a job. And they point you and you go.
Yeah. The filming of the sequences, I mean, I have a hard time conceptualizing the technology to shoot that. Were you, how aware of were you of the technology they were using to try and shoot those sequences? I mean, you're talking big, cumbersome cameras underwater. And
Yeah, Scotty Welburn, who was the cameraman, he built the housing for the 2 cameras. They mounted 2 cameras at that time.
To the 3D.
Yeah, for the 3D. And he built the housing for the camera. And when we were shooting the first movie, Creature, I think it flooded twice. And so they had to hustle to refix the cameras and bring in other cameras and fix the housing and go back underwater. But other than those 2 times, it worked out pretty well. And Scotty was a topside cameraman and started out as a still camera. And he had never done an underwater show and never filmed underwater. And I think he did a marvelous job for a person who was first time.
Yeah, I mean, just the movie itself holds up so well. I think the themes of it, the story of it hold up really well. And it is. It's just gorgeously shot, especially the underwater parts.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You obviously, if you took this into an entire career of getting into production and second unit directing, you were paying close attention to what the guys on that first set and on the subsequent sets were doing because you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you kind of begin to make that transition into doing other shows and other productions?
I think the second movie I was in was I was one of the stuntmen in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Okay.
It was a Disney film, and we shot in the Bahamas. And I saw how, of course, they filmed it, and it was very awkward. They used tripods on the sand, and they would put rugs down so they wouldn't stir the sand up. And they had no moving cameras at all. And the whole film underwater was shot on tripods, just like you shoot topside.
Yeah.
And they had a cameraman there that was from the Navy, and he was just shooting some film, and he had a free swimming camera. And so he was making a fool out of all the cameramen from Hollywood.
All the guys who
And
used to be on Solid
they
Ground.
learned something from him.
Yeah.
So that's how it all started with cameras.
Now, you got involved with, you said Flipper and some of the other shows, but also I just watched the underwater sequence in Thunderball.
Right.
That the underwater sequence that you directed and you did the work for, that's the big, if you're not familiar with, there's like a big battle of all of these divers. I mean, it seems like there's dozens of divers,
Yeah,
lots of action. There's like this giant spear gun fight of these 2 groups of guys who are all swimming at each other and shooting spear guns at each other. Talk about getting involved in that.
I got a call from Kevin McClory, who was kind of a co-writer of Thunderball with Ian Fleming.
Okay.
And he said, we'd like you to come to London and talk to Cubby Broccoli and Harry Schwartz about doing the underwater filming in this movie we're doing, Thunderball. And so I went over there and met with Cubby Broccoli and real Chicago guy and in London. And he said, we've watched a lot of the movies that you've filmed underwater, Flipper and so forth. And he said, why should we hire you to do Thunderball? He said, we're thinking about Cousteau doing it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, there's 2 differences. Cousteau shoots things for real, and we're phonies. We shoot stuff phony. And I said, everything you're doing is phony. He said, okay, you got the job.
To watch that sequence, that looks like a huge undertaking for the number of divers that you have in the water and the amount of action back and forth.
We had 60 divers. We had 30 good guys and 30 bad guys.
Wow.
Roughly. But the great thing about the film is I had no budget.
Okay.
In other words, I just shot until I finished.
Oh, because you had no budget limit.
Yeah, no limit. And that was great.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And we filmed for, I think, 3 months to accomplish all the underwater in the show, not just the battle scene, but all the rest of it. And it was a fun show to do. And like in the fight scenes, I could dream up so many ways of killing somebody, and I'd say to the crew, I said, anybody got an idea how to kill somebody, let's do it. And so everybody had an idea, and so we used the ideas of everybody.
Yeah, I saw spear gun shots and cut air cords and everything. Snatching masks off guys' faces.
Yeah.
The other Bond film you were involved with was...
Never Say Never Again.
Okay, so that's when Connery came back to the role.
Correct, correct. He, in the first movie, Thunderball, he was fairly able to swim. And he could scuba dive a little. And when we did Never Say Never Again, he was a very accomplished diver. And he did a very good job, and he did a lot of his own stuff. And we used a lot of sharks in that show. And he worked with the sharks. And a great guy to work with, very professional. And when he comes on to work, he's ready to work. He doesn't want to fool around. And so did we. So anyway, we got along great, and it was a fun movie to do.
Talk about, so Thunderball, Never Say Never Again. You've done a lot of other things as well. I saw one of your most recent credits was Boardwalk Empire.
No, that wasn't me.
That wasn't you?
That was my son.
That was your son?
Yeah, my
Okay.
son is now in the film business.
All right.
And he's done a lot of very big pictures recently. He has a company called Marine something, I forget. Anyway, he has 15 boats, and he does all the marine activity, boats and motors, and he also does diving, like I did. And he's starting out doing second unit stuff, so he's getting deeply involved in film business. And a lot of times, the stuff he's doing, I get credit for, so.
Okay. Well, that's not bad.
No.
He's in the family business. What talk about kind of the legacy of the creature? This is a role you've been associated with for a long, long time, and something that a lot of people still identify with. I told people that I was going to get a chance to meet you and talk to you, and I was amazed at how many people said, that was one of my favorite films. I mean, there was a whole generation of monster movies during that time, and the creature is a really important part of it.
Well, I think when we were making the film, not me, because it was one of my first jobs, and I liked the money, and I liked the job, and I liked the work. But the actors, Richard Carlson, Richard Denning, Judy Adams, and so forth, I think they all felt this film was a little bit below them. It was a B-class movie, and Universal assigned them to the job, and they'll do the job and get it over with.
Yeah, because they were like contract actors with the studio.
Correct.
You're signed to the studio, and they tell you to go do this movie,
Right.
go do that.
And so anyway, they did the film, and they thought, well, it would be shown in the theater for a week or so in the end, and that's the end of it. But then everybody started liking the Creature movie. And so they've become a little more proud of being in the Creature film. And so they all enjoyed it now.
Yeah. And it led to 2 sequels.
Yes, correct.
And that entire generation of the Universal monster movies. I mean, for so many people, that was like the introduction to sci-fi. I mean, that was the introduction to all of these kinds of movies, and I was impressed with the Creature movie, just the kind of the hopefulness of that movie, of the idea of science is going to tell us more, science is going to teach us more. It's very much a movie of its time, and very different from, I think, a lot of the ways that the way a movie of its type might be handled right now.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. What are some of the other things you've got a chance to do in your career that you've enjoyed?
Well, mostly I enjoy doing the underwater stuff, because that was my favorite. But when I started doing, when I started doing Flipper, I started directing Topside. And then when I started directing Topside, I loved that. So I got more involved in that. And then when you do a movie, as I said, when you do a movie and it was over, the job's over. And then you had to create things of your own. And so I started creating shows of my own, Salty and others.
So you worked Flipper, involving a dolphin, Salty, involving
Sea lion,
a sea lion,
Gentleman,
involving a bear,
Yeah,
the Bond movies involving sharks.
yeah.
So you've got a lot of experience working with animals, and I've got to imagine that you wouldn't get me in the water with a shark or anywhere near a bear for that matter. What's the experience like of being a director on a set when you've got to get your shots and work with live animals and
Well, I'll give an example on Salty. I bought a sea lion that was about 4 or 5 months old. At that time, they weren't protected and you could buy them. And I bought one from LA and they shipped it to Florida. And I raised it in my home as a pet. And bottle fed, start with. And my son went into the Marine Corps, so it had a bedroom of its own.
how did he feel about coming home and it's got a sea lion?
He had to go stay in a motel. But anyway, the sea lion, it was a wonderful animal. As far as a dolphin is concerned, it's in the water. And if you want to be with a dolphin, you got to be in the water. With a sea lion, it's out of the water and in the water. You can be with it on land and on sea. And I had some very funny things happen. He would go in the shower and we'd turn the shower on for him so he could get wet. But we didn't realize his tail would cover the drain. And once he covered the drain, the bathroom would fill up, the hallway would fill up, and down comes the water. So he'd flood the hallway in the house every now and then, so we had to be careful watching him. And he would sleep in the bed, just like a human. And amazing thing is, when he had to go to the bathroom, he would throw his tail off the bed and go on the floor. And so we'd put a tray, we'd just put a tray down there at night, and he would go in the tray, and there was no mess or anything. And I was training him in the house to do things, tricks, and as we did the dolphin. And I had him in the kitchen one day, and I had him in a chair, sitting up, and his voice was horrible. It wasn't a real sea lion voice as a young one. It was just a yeah. So he was in the chair and the phone rang. And when the phone rang, that set him off. He started yelling and he wanted the food I had. So I answered the phone and it was from my wife. And I said, can you hold a second? I tried to shut him up and I couldn't. And I said, my wife isn't here, you'll have to call back. And I hung up. And I kept working with him, and pretty soon I had a pretty big house and a driveway all the way around it. And I looked up and I see this police car going around the house. So they come around again, so I opened the back door up and I stopped. I said, hey, what's going on? They said, nothing. Everything all right? I said, everything's fine. And I found out a neighbor had called my wife, had called the police and thought I was strangling my wife. Anyway, all animals you have the same kind of experience with. We had experiences with the bear the same way.
I imagine you have.
But I'm not going to make any more animal movies because it's too tough. It's really tough.
Well, I've got to imagine you've got a very patient wife if she had a sea lion.
Yeah, she was.
So you do the animal movies, and you're really creating work for yourself. I mean, that's got to be the challenge, like you said, of keeping yourself busy and coming up with story and character and selling those ideas to people. I mean, this took you out in a completely different direction from what you were starting with.
Yeah, we did a little film in Tampa, Florida. It was called Mr. No Legs. There was a young man that was in the war, and he lost both his legs. And he became a karate fighter out of a wheelchair and became very famous and had a school where he taught karate. So this guy got the idea, let's make a movie with him. And so he hired myself and my brother-in-law, who was a writer, to write a script about this guy. And he's a bad guy in the film. And he's called Mr. No Legs. And he has a wheelchair with shotguns sticking out both wheels. And we had some good actors, Lloyd Bachner and others. But anyway, we shot the film on 16 millimeter. And we shot it in like 6 or 8 weeks. And finished the film, ran out of money, and I forgot about the film. And it was made, but never really released. Now recently is what I'm getting at is, I got people coming by with posters of Mr. No Legs to sign, because they released it in England.
Wow.
And
Have you seen the finished product or whatever?
that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's all I know about it.
Wow. That sounds like kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie, a guy in
Yeah.
a wheelchair with shotguns on it. We have a few more minutes here. We've got a microphone there. I know we've got a lot of Creature fans here. If folks have questions for Ricou and they want to ask them, we can have folks come up to the microphone here that's in the center aisle. We've got some questions that you'd like to get answered. I know it's amazing to think about the kind of the legacy of the Universal monsters, and you've got the Creature and Frankenstein, Dracula.
Right.
Did you? I know in hindsight we know a lot about.
It's good to ask a question, or was that a question?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I just have a simple question. Was it hot being in the Creature of Black Lagoon suit, or
Was it hot being in the suit? Is that what he said?
Yeah, was it hot?
Well, it could have been, but it wasn't, because we shot in the wintertime. The air temperature was about 49 at that time, and the water temperature was 51. And so I got pretty chilly after you go in and out of the water, and you're out there all day long. Amazing thing when it first started is I would start shivering, and some of the crew would feel sorry for me and give me a little shot of brandy. And the other person didn't know one person gave me a shot of brandy. So somebody else would give me a little shot of brandy. And pretty soon the Creature was full of brandy. So they had to stop that.
Yeah, when the Creature's swimming crooked, that's time to stop the brand. The legacy of the Universal monsters, I know that we all kind of lump them in together now. Were you kind of aware at the time, during the 50s when these movies were all being shot, that these were all in the same family? Did you have any interaction with the other actors and the other from the other movies?
No, not at all.
Was there, I mean, the monster movie craze back then,
Right.
I think you see these generational things. I mean, we're in the midst of this superhero movie
Right.
boom. Was there what was that about? And to be, I mean, I look at it from years later. What do you feel like those movies, the whole monster movie thing? I mean, you've got so much going on in the world at that time. You've got the rise of communism, and you've got the post-war, atomic fears, and you've got, the racial politics and everything that's going on then. I mean, these all kind of hit on similar notes and similar themes in a lot of that.
Well, I think mostly I was involved in film,
Mm-hmm.
and I paid very little attention to whether an atomic bomb was going to drop or not. And as far as other actors are concerned that I worked with, I wasn't aware of Bela Lugosi or Frankenstein or any of the rest of them. They were interested in doing their job in the film business, not worrying about anything else. But today, an actor, mostly, they're involved in politics, they're involved in everything. But in those days, you're only involved in what you were doing.
Yeah, you're punching the clock.
Yeah.
I know there's been talk of bringing back. You see so many of these characters that get revisited, the Draculas and Frankenstein, different projects. I've heard talk that there are some in Hollywood who love the Creature and might like to see it come back. What would your feelings be on bringing back the Creature for a new generation of folks?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with Jack Arnold. About 2 or 3 years after the Creature movies were over, I got a call from Jack, and he says, I want to do a remake of The Creature from the Black Lagoon. He says, I want you to be involved. I said, sure, I'll love it. And I didn't hear back from him. And then maybe a month later, he called me, he said, it fell through. A couple of years later, I heard from Jack again. He said, we're going to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
I said, great. give me a call. He said, okay. They never did it. And then Jack, I think he lost one of his legs through disease or something. So Jack got uninvolved.
Mhm.
And then I heard they were going to do a remake 2 or 3 years ago. And never happened. And then just recently, they say they're going to do it. And it hasn't happened. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a story that could be told there for today's generation to make?
Well, I think they could make a great movie. Or they could make a great movie that'll flop. CGI generated monster. And they want to have 6 or 7 creatures. And I mean, you know, not the same thing that we did, so to speak. I think they could make another one and do a very good job of it, and it would be successful.
Talk about, because you're a very practical effects kind of guy for the underwater
Right.
sequences that you shot. What's your take on practical effects versus the computer-generated effects now? I mean,
I think they're both great, but I think they overdo them. That's the problem. It's overdone. And they can't have a car crash. It's got to crash into a building, and the building's got to fall down. And 6 airplanes crash into that. You know, and then pretty soon you don't know what the movie's about. You know, so I think they just overdo it.
well, it becomes a let's make it bigger than the last guy's movie
Yeah.
instead of being germane to the plot necessarily. It's been great talking to you.
Well, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions before we wrap it up and let Ricou get back down to the floor? Yeah, step up to the mic.
I saw the film last night in 3D and was really impressed with the 3D. I was wondering how they lit the underwater scenes.
It was all done in available light.
Oh, it was?
Yes, there was no lighting at all.
Wow. So that water must be very clear. Was
Oh, it is. It's crystal clear.
Oh, that's interesting.
Matter of fact, it's too clear. Because, in other words, the less you saw of the monster, the more you were afraid of him.
Yeah.
When you saw it, the whole thing, he wasn't so scary, you know.
Anybody else with questions? You can adjust that mic stand up probably so you don't have to.
I have a question, but I bet there's people who got questions here, but they're afraid to step up here. Why don't you see?
Yeah.
That's
Does anybody step on up? Yes, sir.
What sort of depths underwater did some of that filming have to take place? It looked like it was fairly deep.
Well, some of it was, but not a lot. We filmed in about 30 feet of water because at 30 feet you can dive all day and not get the bends, you know. But below 30 feet you have to start watching yourself. But in the film Creature, there were 2 sequences where we swam. I'd say the deepest was 80 feet. One was where the creature dives overboard with the girl and is swimming down with her. Well, I had to swim down with her, grabbing her leg or arm, I forget, and swim down, and she couldn't swim at that time. She was being forced down. I had to go 80 feet to disappear under a ledge that looked like a cave. And what worried me was Ginger, who doubled Julie Adams, usually had trouble clearing her ears. You know, you clear your ears when you dive so that you don't bust an eardrum. I was worried about her busting an eardrum because I had no way to know whether she was clearing her ears or not, because I was swimming and pulling and I couldn't tell. So I worried about her busting an eardrum, but fortunately she could clear her ears okay and she didn't bust an eardrum. I could clear my ears very easily because I was used to doing it.
It's amazing to the amount of effort it takes to be able to dive down to 80 feet and do that, dragging somebody with you and making it look good for the camera.
Well, you just did it.
There's a reason they picked you.
Thanks, Gil-Man.
That was too tall.
Thanks for your-
That's much better.
It's full of stand though.
I had a question. There's a beautiful sequence in there where the creature's swimming underwater and Julie Adams or her double is swimming on top, and they're kind of
Yes.
synchronized, and it's almost kind of like ballet, and very beautiful sequence. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how that was structured and how that came together, either shooting it or the final cut as it was composed?
Well, two things. The creature is supposed to be following her. And as you know, if you swim and somebody's above you, you can't see out of the back of your head. So I had to turn over and swim on my back in order to see where she is or where she's going. So she's swimming and I swim up. I have to turn over and swim under her in order to see where she's going so I can follow her. And it just turned out to be a nice little sequence. So that was roughly it.
Step right up.
What kind of gear was used inside the suit so you could breathe? Was there anything?
I breathed from an air hose. Like if you're in your backyard and you want to drink some water out of the hose, you drink the water and what you don't drink spills out. Well, air is the same way. You breathe what air you want and let the rest just spill out. And I breathed from an air hose, and when the cameraman was ready, he would signal me. I would give the air hose to a safety person, and I'd go into the scene, hold my breath as long as I could to accomplish the scene. And there would be two other safety men with air hoses on other sides of the camera, and they would bring air into me as well. We had a signal that if I went totally limp, that meant I needed air. The reason being, the creature was always moving, his hands or his head or something. But if I didn't do anything, that meant I needed air. And the signal worked fine, and we never had a problem. So it worked out well.
A question. Karloff, I believe, was in the 70s when he did the Frankenstein monster. Would you ever consider coming back if they did a remake?
I'm too old, I'm sure. No, but I would be happy to help with the film. And I'd swim in it if they wanted me to. But, by the way, Boris Karloff's daughter I met at a show. Very nice lady. And she does shows now with him, about him. And very nice girl.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
What is the longest, going back to the previous question that they had, what's the longest you've held your breath underwater? And did you have to condition yourself or exercise to train up to, like, holding it for a couple minutes? Or
No, at that time I could say I could maybe at the most, if I wasn't doing absolutely anything, I could hold my breath maybe 4 minutes. But as soon as you start doing something, fighting, swimming fast, or whatever, you're using up oxygen. So I'd say cut your holding your breath down to a minute or so. So I'd say a minute or so during the scenes.
Any other questions?
Uh-oh.
There you go.
Where's the costume now?
Oh, where is the costume now?
Well, the costume was made of rubber, and it just rubber rotted away. An interesting thing is there was a company, I forget where they were from, but they put out a magazine, and they have an auction every year, and they sell items. And most of the items are very expensive. And they were selling the creature head. And they wrote me a letter and said, "Is this the head you wore?" And I told them I had no idea, where it was or not. It was a head of the creature, but it looked like it was melting. And I thought, they're going to sell that. But anyway, I said there was a guy in California named Bob Burns who knows all about the creatures and stuff Universal did. They contacted him and they got him to say that was really a creature head that I wore. So they asked me if I would write them a little letter saying it was a creature head I wore, and they'd give me $500. I said, why not? So they sent me $500 and I wrote them a letter. And then they had the auction a couple of months later. And they sold the head for $80,000. Who bought it, I don't know, but it's got to be nothing right now. I don't know.
You were the creature just for the underwater sequences.
Correct.
There was another actor who was on the back lot,
Ben Chapman.
Ben Chapman. Was there ever any discussion of trying to have you do the creature above water?
Oh, yeah. The problem, I was 6 feet, and they wanted the monster to be big. And I think Ben was 6'4", something like that. And so they wanted the topside monster big, compared to the actors. So when I did the underwater sequences, I'm being 6 feet. The doubles were used for Richard Carlson and Richard Denning. We hired guys that were 5 feet. So they.
So you look like a
So
big
I
guy.
look bigger than them. So anyway, that's how they took care of it.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we're about out of our time here. I know Rico will be back down on the floor signing and doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot.